members, if I could call the meeting to order, please. Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to begin by welcoming everyone to this meeting of the Environment and Green Investment Committee at New Shire Hall. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting. Can I ask, though, that everyone present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate while the meeting is taking place. Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, please leave by the nearest marked fire exit and assemble in the car park. The closest fire escape is through the middle doors on my left. So I'll start the meeting, please, by asking the Democratic Services Officer to report any apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We've got Councillor Reynolds subbing for Councillor Jonas King, and I believe we've got Councillor Ambrose Smith subbing for Councillor Tierney. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Does any member wish to disclose any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? No? Okay, thank you very much indeed. So the next item is that we're being asked to approve the minutes of the meeting of the 1st of December 2022 as an accurate record. If any committee member wants to raise a question on the accuracy of the minutes only, could they please do so now? I'm not seeing any, so we'll take that as carried unanimously. And then the other item, the other part of this item is an updated action log, which is included in the published papers for the meeting. Do officers have any updates on the actions? I suspect not. No? Are there any questions on the action log, or can we simply take that as noted? No questions. Thank you very much indeed. We've received no petitions or public questions under item 3, so our next item is item 4, which is enabling net zero phase 1 programme update. So I will ask Cheryl French, Assistant Director for Climate Change and Energy Services, to please present this report. Thank you, Cheryl.
Morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be able to report the progress update. It's a 6-month update for this Enabling Net Zero first phase of the programme, which is around mobilising resources to deliver the climate change and environment strategy and its climate and net zero ambitions. Just to confirm, this was a programme which is funded through the Just Transition funding, and that was 2.175 million agreed by Strategy and Resources, and then the business case confirmed in July. The objectives of this first phase programme are to align the whole organisation to deliver the necessary changes to support our communities and businesses, to shift from a small number of officers delivering policies and projects to reduce carbon emissions and climate impacts, to having the whole organisation of 4,300 staff understanding and upskilling to address the climate crisis. The other thing that we're looking to achieve in this programme, this phase 1, is to ensure that the high carbon emitting sectors of the council emissions, so highways, rural estate, our buildings, which form a large part of the council's carbon footprint, that we tackle those through getting decarbonisation plans together to know how we can reduce those high emissions by 2030. So I'm not going to go through the whole report and all the things that have been done. I just want to make some highlights. So the first section under governance, we've included three new projects into the programme. The one is around locally determined contributions, and this is a piece of work that Hughes Hall, University of Cambridge, has been collaborating with us and South Cambs and others, and which we provided through the Net Zero review to Chris Skidmore as part of his review process and consultation during the last 3 months. And part of that was to say, how is it that local authorities can work and collaborate within the national framework that has been set up on nationally determined contributions? And the Local Government Association and Chris Skidmore would like to understand more about what these locally determined contributions could do and how that could work and nest together with the national framework. The second part or project was the NHS Green Plan, and now we have an integrated care service. It's ensuring that the requirements coming through that NHS Green Plan are worked through with us corporately at County Council and implemented into the work on our care services. And this is to ensure that we have good governance around that process as well. And then the third one is really about looking longer term and preparing ourselves for the phase 2 and phase 3, which is around how are we going to finance the change to net zero by 2045, particularly looking at our energy infrastructure and our transport infrastructure. So those are 3 additions. I'd also like to draw your attention to paragraph 2.1.1, and this is just an issue that where there have been changes of committee and roles in the organisation, that we're seeking an update to a delegation that we already have around green investments and loans to schools. And then the final thing I wanted to just highlight quickly is that in paragraphs 2.4 to 2.10, this gives you a sense of the work that's been undertaken over the last 6 months across the 8 work packages that we have. And so those 8 work packages covered, just for your benefit, is work package 1 is around tackling those high emission sectors and getting decarbonisation plans. Work package 2 is around how do we get all the data to inform us, are we in what direction we're going with our carbon emissions? Work package 3 is around financing the changes, financing the future in terms of net zero. Work package 4 is about policy, governance, and how we progress things like the triple bottom line, like locally determined contributions. Then we have forward strategy. We have a work package on procurement. We have a work package on people and the changes that we're going to want to do in terms of upskilling. And then we have the final work package, which is that we have a lot of projects already taking place and delivering right now. Okay, so that's it. Any questions?
Any questions for Cheryl on that, please? Councillor Milnes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Cheryl, for that report. Just wondering, in terms of the heat decarbonisation plan for our buildings, and how soon we might see a net reduction in utility bills from that decarbonisation programme, and so that we can see whether that's got a positive economic effect as well as the decarbonisation. Thank you.
Yes, so property, so Chris Finch is leading the work on the decarbonisation plans for our property buildings. And in the decarbonisation plans, you will need to include energy efficiency, which prevents energy usage. So I would hope we would see reductions from measures that come through on energy efficiency. Obviously, it's also looking at changing from gas and oil to air source heat pumps or other forms of low carbon heating. We are in a bit of a time of volatility in terms of pricing, and so with electricity prices still high, we can see gas prices falling. I would hope that you could see reductions in utility bills, but it is a very difficult thing to predict right now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Corney.
This is probably more of a plug for Cheryl, really, but 2.9, the carbon literacy training. There's only 16 members have taken part yet so far, and say just giving you a chance to give it a bit of a plug, really. So when's the next session, and so try and encourage people to go jump on board.
Really difficult question on what's the exact date. So Emily and my team, and we have a new person, Joanne Worthington, who's come in as a training person. So I'm not sure when the next one is for councillors, but I did have the discussion with Emily, which is that she wanted to talk to group leaders, for group leaders to work with councillors to identify slots, so you can get groups of councillors together so that we can then come and run a training session with you. What we found hasn't worked as well is us trying to find a date and then you signing up to those training sessions, because that doesn't necessarily fit with councillors' agendas. So we've decided to change it around, that you find the date that works with you, for you, and we'll come along and provide the training for you. Okay, but the ambition is to get higher levels of members trained from 16.
Absolutely, yes. That was a conversation I was having yesterday by email with Emily. And I'm told that provided we can get groups together of at least 6 elected members together, there are no scheduled sessions as such, but because it's now the training's now being rolled out through the officer body. But if we can get 6 or more members together, then they will organise sessions. So I very much hope that spokes will be taking that back and promoting that within their group. So thank you for the question. That was something I was also going to draw to members' attention. Councillor Bradnam.
Just on that, a small matter of detail, is it run online, or is it, do you need to have a location?
Yeah, it can be both.
It can be,
and we prefer to do it in person, because it's quite nice to get interaction between people about thoughts, but it has also been successfully run online.
Also been run as whole days or as 2 separate sessions. I've got one member of my group who is sort of straddling between sessions at the moment, so just needs that second half to finish off. So, you know, I think arrangements to suit. Councillor Hathorn.
It's sort of comments and questions, sorry. So the retrofitting buildings and the smart energy grids and lots of these other projects, but those ones in particular, you know, they're really, really great things that I think we're doing. And I always say this, but I think the point is that we would need to always say this. And I just don't think enough people know about it. And we've just got to find ways of shouting, you know, telling the same story again and again. You know, even other councillors sort of say, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we could have solar panels on the park and ride? To say, well, you know, this is exactly what's happening, but it can't all happen now. So just, you know, it's not, I guess, it doesn't come down to me, but finding new ways to tell the story and new people to go out there and tell that story, I think is so important. So if there's a way that can be done, that would be really good. And the Solar Together is obviously a really good scheme. I mean, I was reading that 1 in 5 buildings in the UK were built before 1919, which I think mine is as well. And never before have I been more motivated to, and we have put a lot of insulation in, but you know, you look at the energy bills and you're even more motivated to do more, but it's difficult with old buildings, and Solar Together isn't the full package. So, and I look around my village and lots of the buildings are old. So anything that could be done to help people, just, you know, I guess it's, you don't want to just get a contractor in, you want to know what you need to achieve, so that then when someone comes, you know whether they're talking common sense to you or they're sort of selling you. So anything that could be done to, you know, if the council can look at ways in which that could be supported, that would be really good. And EV chargers, I know that work's ongoing and it's really complicated, but maybe what it comes down to is a members briefing, because when I sort of dipped my toe in there, it, you know, like almost like a regular update, but when I dipped my toe into that, I found it impossible to make any progress and really frustrating. So, and I know that it's because difficult decisions need to be made, but having an update as to where those decisions are and when it might be possible to install them on the highway would be really helpful.
Okay, so thank you. The first one, which is actually a comms issue. We've got Kate Rogerson has just joined the council as a communications manager with the specific brief to be working through on climate, and is sitting in on a couple of our on our team meetings to be able to pick up where we should be promoting and to try and bring that forward. So I hope that we will upscale in terms of the comms that we do for key projects. Just on St Ives and Babraham, just to let you know, both are in construction, and you should see panels, and I'm just looking at Councillor Reynolds in case he's seen at the Park and Ride on St Ives that there are solar panels already there, just the scheme hasn't quite finished. But Babraham will be happening this year, we're in construction. So the second point, which is about helping general public to retrofit their homes. Solar Together is one thing. But we also have, and it's a collection of local authorities led by Cambridge City Council, but County Council, Fenland, East Cambs, we're all on the group. We have, through that partnership, secured funding to support retrofits of homes, government funding, but we've also set up a procurement where we've got, I think it's 6 suppliers who will also work with people who aren't in the vulnerable categories, but want to make a change. They will come and support you to identify what you need to do to your home, and we'll put together a package of works, because actually the complication of retrofitting is aligning the whole range of different services that you need to come in to do the different types of measures in your home. So I can circulate the details around that Cambridgeshire retrofit programme and the procurement and the suppliers, if that's helpful. Yeah, and then your third point on EV chargers. Now, I think I'm going to come forward with some positives here. So just in a discussion yesterday with Emily Bolton, who's the Climate Crisis Strategy Manager, she's working closely with David Allett and CPCA, Emma White, and is pulling together the first draft of the EV charging strategy for the CPCA and the constituent partners. And I'm just trying to remember from yesterday when that was coming forward, but I think it's imminent. And so that will hopefully set the context of what we need to do and where. She's already done a briefing note, which went, I think, to the Highways and Transport Committee. I don't know if anybody's on the Highways and Transport Committee, but I think a briefing note was circulated on some of the specifications that we need to bring forward for that. So we're getting there.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions for Cheryl at this point? No? Any debate to be had on the paper? Anybody wish to speak rather than ask a question? No? Okay, then in conclusion, then I'll just say that I think that there are some really significant things in here. It's a paper I was very, very pleased to be able to ask Cheryl to put to this committee. The significant things for me are the move towards carbon budgeting. We've seen carbon footprints, which told us what we did. Carbon budgeting tells us what we need to do and how we can do it, and it's a forward rather than a backward look, and that's very significant. I think also significant is local area energy planning, which is a very big potential piece of work and some brilliant data. Cheryl and I were both going ooh-ah over a wonderful widget where you can actually see at street level the different types of heating and the proportion of heating of different types in people's homes, and that's really useful in helping to look at really local energy solutions. So I think there's some great stuff in here, and I'm really, really pleased to see it. I think the list as well of what we're looking forward to doing in the next 6 months is excellent, and I'm delighted. So the recommendations are to note the progress implementing the Enabling Net Zero Phase 1 programme approved in July 2022, to note and support the programme changes as set out in paragraphs 2.1 to 2.3, and to update the delegations for green investment and loan approvals for schools as set out in paragraph 2.1.1. That's seconded by the Vice Chair. So can I see those in favour of that, please? Thank you. I think that is unanimous. Thank you very much indeed, members, and thank you, Cheryl. Really delighted to see everything that's going on. So on to item 5 then, which is the corporate performance report, and I believe we have Rachel Hallam, Research Manager for the Business Intelligence Service, online to present this report. So good morning.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. This report sets out and supports the committee with its performance management role. It provides an update on the current status of the selected key performance indicators, known as KPIs, which track the performance of the services the committee oversees. These KPIs were agreed in September at committee. Just to highlight, this report is for information only and covers the period of Q2 2022-23, which is up to the end of September last year. The full report is in the associated appendix, and it's important to note that some KPIs are still in development. This is to be expected and is in line with the approach taken across the committees. The committee are asked to note and comment on the performance information this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Members, do you have any questions for Rachel on the performance reports? Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps it explains it somewhere, but looking at the appendix at indicator 24 on page 37 of our agenda, page 4 of the report, I just wanted to understand why does so indicator 24 is the percentage of premises in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough with access to at least superfast broadband. And I wanted to understand why the target line went dramatically up in 2020, whereas, you know, what was it that changed that caused that target to go up? Was there a big initiative towards getting superfast broadband in, but it hasn't been realised? I just wondered what the difference was between those two.
Rachel, are you able to shed any light on that?
I think that might be one I need to take away for the service to answer. I think it's due to the reprofiling after the pandemic, but I'll take that away and check.
Thank you, Rachel. If we could have a note round to members once that's been done to clarify that. Councillor Ferguson.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. It's also on indicator 24 as well, which has got an amber rating, despite the fact that we set a target to be fulfilled in 2020, which we still haven't realised in 2023. So, you know, I think maybe that's a bit of an optimistic grading. I know these things are always slightly arbitrary, but we're 3 years behind schedule, or maybe 2 years.
Is that something you can address now, Rachel, or is that also something that will come around in a briefing note?
Yeah, I think that's something that I'll take away, if that's okay, Chair, and provide a briefing note to address both of those points on indicator 24 when I've had a chance just to clarify with officers.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Councillor Hathorn.
On page 45, we seem to be increasing the amount of fugitive refrigerant gases. Is there anything we can do about that? Or is that just it's being monitored more? What's going on?
I'll ask Cheryl to take that.
Actually, that's a good question, and I'll have to ask Sarah the reason, but I suspect it's because we've got more details around the carbon emissions associated with the fugitive emissions.
And is there anything we can do about it? Because they're quite bad, aren't they?
They are quite bad. And yes, there are. But what we'll do is we'll get a note to send around to you, because I want to ask Sarah what the plans are. I mean, I think the important thing that we wanted to highlight on that particular graph is that if you look at the blue line, which is the focus on emissions from gas and oil use, that's from our buildings. And you can see that that is going down, and that's where we've been targeting. So the next parts to target, obviously, are the emissions from fleet vehicles, the grey, and with that growing fugitive emissions, we're going to have to look and see what we can do there too. Okay.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Councillor Bradnam.
It's more of an observation, really, Chair. It was just I wanted to draw attention to indicator 223, the waste per head 12 months rolling average, which is on page 43. And, you know, I'm very encouraged that the amount of waste per head is actually gradually going down through 2018 through to 2022. And, you know, there might be all sorts of reasons for that, but I think it indicates that residents in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough are trying to reduce the amount of waste that they produce. So I just find that quite encouraging. It's slow, but it is actually on its way, which is good.
Thank you. Question from me then, if there are no, there is Councillor Gardner, and then I'll reserve my question to later.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's on page 41 with regard to the Cambridgeshire recycling, reuse, composting and recovery rate. We seem to be declining. Have you got any reason why recycling and reuse and composting rates are declining within the county? And it says the direction of improvement is on the upward, but in actual fact, it's going down. So I think the arrow is the wrong way round, unless you can tell me why the arrow should be showing an improvement when you say actually changing the performance is declining.
Rachel, are you able to take that one?
I can briefly draw attention to the commentary that is included, which provides that performance has fallen significantly over the last quarter, particularly due to the recyclates no longer being recovered at the front end of the MBT, but mostly due to the drought over the summer, resulting in lower green waste tonnage for composting. I think that on the first point, anything further than that, I'll need to take away to officers. On the direction for improvement, just to clarify that corner, that is where we want to see it go, compared to the change in performance that outlines where it is currently going. So that's the difference between those two there. But I can take away an action actually to make that a little bit clearer, perhaps in some of the descriptions in this report.
Thank you very much indeed, Rachel. That's helpful. Oh, two more fresh hands. Councillor Ferguson and then Councillor Mills.
On that same point, on indicator 150A, we've just seen that the amount of waste is declining per household. Indicator 150A is a percentage base, I guess, based on the waste collected. So if the amount of waste is declining, actually is it also true that the amount that we're recycling, even though the line looks almost flat, if we're collecting less waste, then it's natural that we'll be recycling less. If you see what I'm saying? Probably not.
Thank you. Councillor Mills.
Thanks, Chair. I can confirm from a South Cambs perspective that green waste collection weights, though absolute collection volumes was low, as the officer just said, in terms of because of the droughts and the green waste. But these variances are relatively small, as you can see there. So the general level continues at a rate, but I know from the collection authority's perspective, we are making every effort to try and improve that. And you'll know that South Cambs has a separate food waste collection trial coming to an end shortly or right now, which has been part of the testing of the proposed government changes in collection, including food waste.
Thank you. My question was going back to broadband, actually, which was the reduction in, so this is page 38. The indicator number is off my screen, so I shall see if I can find that. Indicator 25, take up of new fibre broadband services, which is declining despite the direction for improvement, the desirable direction being upward. We're seeing a decline recently. Do we have any explanation for that decline? Is it just down to the note in the commentary that the way the take-up of broadband services is measured has changed, or is there something more about fewer people taking up those opportunities, maybe due to cost of living crisis or whatever it may be? And if we can't answer that now, Rachel, is that something you can add to your list of broadband items to circulate subsequently?
Yes, Chair. I'll make sure that there is a note circulated on indicator 24 and indicator 25, picking up those once I've had a chance to just double check those with officers.
Thank you very much indeed, Rachel. I'm not seeing any other questions, I think. So the recommendation is to note and comment on performance information and take action as necessary. Is there any debate to be had on that? Sorry, that needs to be seconded. Yeah. Is there any debate to be had on that? Councillor Hathorn.
I mean, it's really just a continuation of what's been said already, but fundamentally, a lot of the recycling, your sort of improved performance in recycling, comes from carting heavy garden waste around the county. You know, it's really difficult because that's how we get the you know, that's what the KPI is saying you're doing well for, but it you know, fundamentally, is that really such a great thing to do? We never, you know, it's difficult to have those conversations because we're not, you know, determining what the national sort of criteria for recycling rates are, but you know, it feels non-ideal.
Thank you. I tend to agree, but I think also that that's the purpose of having our own indicators, and that once you've got a number of different indicators measuring different things, you can triangulate and see what's really going on rather than relying on a single indicator to say good or bad. And I agree entirely. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you. I'm looking at indicator 226 on page 46, and I'm wanted to understand, I mean, the biggest change in those numbers is the drop in construction materials. Now, this is to do with scope 3 carbon emissions, which the narrative on the left tells us means indirect emissions from assets outside the county council's control. So employee-owned vehicles, purchased goods and services, outsourced activities. So I'm not quite sure if this relates to buildings that aren't being built, you know, since, I mean, obviously 2018, 19 and 19, 20, the biggest individual source was construction materials. So is this drop in 2021 and 21, 22, is this drop relating to buildings that we have not commissioned? Or that we've commissioned but haven't been built, or that are to do with how our staff travel to Alconbury, or what's the reason for that big drop? I wonder if Cheryl could.
Cheryl.
Yes, so the big drop is that during those COVID years, the building of new schools, so it's construction materials for that, which were our scope 3, that's where you've seen the drop. We do expect that to bounce back, and obviously 2022-23 column, which isn't there yet because we don't have the data, will reflect a bigger dark blue or black figure next year.
So that was because we weren't building new schools
during that COVID time, so that's why the emissions reduced so much. So it's almost a blip because of the COVID times.
So I'm just wondering, slightly outside the remit of this committee, but I'm just wondering whether we're going to incur costs later on by building schools later.
Say, Councillor Bradham, I think that's rather outside the remit of this committee. I did wonder whether some of that construction materials was also some road construction, particularly construction by developers rather than directly by ourselves, though I suppose. Does it cover our contractors?
So it would also cover highways. The work with Milestone, thank you. So yes, it's also a reflection of a reduction of work during that time.
Thank you. Any other debate to be had on this? No. So I've stated the recommendations already. Are members happy to agree the recommendations? Can I see those in favour? Thank you. I think that's unanimous. Yeah, thank you very much, members. Item 6 now is a late item. A Little Thetford School low carbon heating project. I've accepted this as a late report on the following grounds. This matter was brought to the Green Investment and Utilities Advisory Group on the 11th of this month, so 8 days ago, and members of the advisory group felt that it was something that required a committee decision, as it was potentially a deviation from established council policy. The agenda for the committee needed to be published on the 11th of January, and the report had to be drafted and agreed prior to circulation. So the public sector decarbonisation scheme grant funding needs to be spent by 31st of March. And to achieve this, the school would need to be in contract for the works by the end of January, i.e. before our next meeting. So the report was published on Monday, and you should have received a copy of that report by email. Have all members received that report? Yes, okay, thank you. So can I ask Cheryl French, Assistant Director Climate Change and Energy Services, to present the report, please?
So in July 21, Environment and Green Investment Committee agreed a funding model for low carbon heating projects, but specifically for maintained schools. So as part of that, the public sector decarbonisation scheme, which is government funding, which we've been looking to access to support buildings to decarbonise. And that particular funding model was including using public sector decarbonisation funding, plus any loan that we might need to support to get a business case together, and also includes providing capital contributions from the Environment Fund, along with education capital school condition allowance budgets. And so it was saying that to make a project stack up in terms of a business case, using the collection of those different pots would allow you to deliver a low carbon heating project with an under a 20-year payback, which was the policy position that we'd agreed at previous committees. So the Environment Fund contribution is often substantial and is provided to reflect the benefit to society of the carbon savings delivered. So by that, what it means that if we're cutting carbon emissions early, we get a bigger benefit in terms of the climate impacts that could occur to society later on. So Little Thetford is one of the current batch of schools. We've got 8 schools altogether. The others are all maintained and continue to remain maintained, which we secured grant for earlier this year, 2022. Little Thetford is currently a maintained school. So if you consider it, it is policy compliant. However, we found out that they have been approved to academise and will become an academy in September. This is immediately after we will have completed the low carbon heating project, which is scheduled to complete during the summer holidays. So committee's decision is sought on whether to provide capital contributions, and that is the contributions, both the Environment Fund and it is the Environment Fund, because separately you've got the education capital contribution, which is towards the costs as well. So in terms of the overall costs, what we're looking at is somewhere between 103 and 163,000 from the Environment Fund, and a 33,000 contribution, which is the school condition allowance contribution. Now, the reason I've given you a range of 103 to 163 is because 163 is the worst case scenario. We have got, in discussion with our contractors, we think there is a very good position that it's likely to come in closer to 103, but we can't guarantee that right now. So the contributions currently to make up the project for Little Thetford are £97,000, which is the public sector decarbonisation scheme grant that we secured from government, which has to be delivered by the end of March. We have a repayable £47,000 loan, which the council provides to help finance this, which gets paid back. And then there's the Environment Fund contribution that I was just talking about, which is somewhere between 103 and 163. Funding the project will ensure the heating on the site is completely decarbonised in line with the council's objectives of achieving net zero by 2045. It saves 400 tonnes of carbon over the lifetime of the heating plant, so that's just on the heating. It ensures that the 97k grant funding is secured for use in a Cambridgeshire school. And what I wanted to just try and put across to you is that this means that there's an approximate cost or carbon cost per tonne of, at the lower end, £339 to £489 per tonne, depending on what the price comes through between 103,000 and 163,000. Okay.
Thank you very much indeed, Cheryl. Before I ask for questions from members, we've received comments from the local member, Councillor Dan Schumann. These have been emailed to all members and are also available on the website. But in the interest of transparency, I will ask the Democratic Services Officer to read out Councillor Schumann's comments.
As local member, I am writing to express my full support for the Little Thetford C of E Primary School low carbon heating project to decarbonise the school's heating. Council's climate change and environment strategy sets an objective to achieve net zero for the county as a whole by 2045. Achieving the council's target of net zero carbon emissions for Cambridgeshire by 2045 will require fully decarbonising heating in buildings. Capital funding the Little Thetford low carbon heating project would make a positive contribution to this objective. It will also raise awareness amongst parents and school neighbours of practical steps to address the challenge of climate change and provide an opportunity for the children at the school to learn about practical steps to address the climate challenge. Also, the condition report for Little Thetford Primary School identifies the existing oil tank bund as requiring urgent replacement. Excuse me. And the oil tank is 25 years old, so this is the perfect time for action. I am aware that school will cease to be maintained shortly and be academised, which raises the question of whether the Environment Fund capital contribution should still be made available for this project. However, I believe that not proceeding with the project would be perceived as the council transferring a decarbonisation liability to a third party and would mean that 96,530 PSDS grant funding would be lost, increasing the net cost of decarbonising the site's heating when this does occur, which would be counterproductive and a wasted opportunity for the county and the environment. If capital funding is not provided, the project will not proceed, and PSDS grant funding must be spent by 31st of March 2023. So to achieve this, the school would need to be in contract for the works by the end of January. Therefore, I urge the committee to support this excellent project.
Thank you very much indeed, Dawn. Members, do you have any questions for Cheryl? I believe earlier I saw Councillor Bradnam's hand. Did you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. I was thinking probably what I wanted to say would be more appropriate for debate.
Oh, thank you very much. Any questions for Cheryl on this? Yep, Councillor Bradnam.
I will ask a question of clarification. Since it became apparent that the school was going to be academised, have the officers spoken to them about the academy making a contribution towards the cost of the of any conversion if it went ahead?
So yes, so Chris Parkin was in the meeting with DMAT, which is the Academy Trust, and they had indicated that a small contribution towards the project, but certainly that they would not be able to contribute anywhere near the 103 to 163,000 that we are asking for from the decarbonisation fund. So although they haven't confirmed a definite figure, the impression is that they might be able to make up a small contribution.
So can you give us an indication of, I appreciate you may not want to put numbers on it or percentages, but when you say small, I'm just wondering how small.
Yeah. Can I just cut in here? I mean, I do think this is a matter for negotiation between the council and DMAT, and I'm not sure that it's necessarily helpful to start talking about negotiations in public. So I think I'd like to draw a line under that question if I can, and I'm sure it's a subject that will be returned to in debate. Councillor Hathorn.
Can we confirm that the Academy are supportive of the aspiration for the school to be low carbon? And, you know, I'm going to, I don't know, yeah, go back on it after lots of money has been spent on it.
Sorry, so my understanding is that they will be supportive, but obviously there's still a discussion to confirm that finally, and it all rests on how we can work through on the finances on the project.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Cheryl on this? Councillor Gowing.
If we did nothing, would the Academy take it over as it is? Would we expect it to bring it into any sort of order?
So obviously the Academy Trust, if we hand it over, they currently have functioning oil boilers. Their challenge will be when those oil boilers need to be replaced, and dependent on where we are with policy, with government policy. So there was two things that I just wanted to highlight in that. Sorry, I've got a little note from Chris Parkin, who just highlighted a couple of things for me on that. I just want to find them in here. It's really the position that government's got, which was that it mentioned last year in the Queen's speech that there was a view of buildings all academising by 2030. Now, what's happened since that Queen's speech is I think that the white paper might have been withdrawn. But what we do know is that the government's heat in building strategy, which was published a couple of years ago, identified that there was an intention to ban the installation of oil boilers in non-domestic buildings from 2024. So that's only a couple of years away. However, although the consultation has taken place on domestic oil boilers from 2026 being banned, there hasn't been a consultation yet on the non-domestic sector, which is where a school would come into it. And there's no legislation being introduced to implement that oiler ban yet. So what we don't know is what would happen if, for example, they needed to replace their oil boiler once we've handed it over.
Yeah, I mean, 2.2.1 of the report comments on precedent in these situations with handovers to multi-academy trusts or other trusts, and the precedent is that we can't simply do nothing at all, that at a minimum we would either have to do the urgent work, that we would review what work was urgently required, and that if the work on the tank was urgent, as is identified in the report, then we would either do that work ourselves before handover and leave them with a functioning oil system, or we would hand over a sum of money to enable DMAT to do that themselves. The question then is whether we want to pull back from the ambition of decarbonising the school by giving them money or upgrading their oil tank to give them a functioning oil system, or whether we want to continue with our intention of providing that package of grant and resource of our own and loan, despite the fact that we know that the building will no longer be ours from within about a month of installation. That's why this has come to this committee. So, Councillor Milnes.
I don't know whether this counts as a question or a debate, but just to confirm what you just said, this is implication of the Conservative agenda over several, well, certainly in the last 2 decades, to move to privatisation of the education system, taking it away from local authorities and passing it to privately owned academy trusts. It feels really annoying to have been put in this predicament, where what we want to do is continue offering improvements to the heating system, in this case of from an oil-based system, but then giving away our assets further in the same way that that whole academisation was a suspect transfer of capital assets on a huge scale, done quite surreptitiously. And I find myself torn by this debate today over this particular school, because I would love to be able to say, yes, let's spend the money, but then give it away. Thank you.
I'm not sure there was a question in there, but I think we've moved on to debate now. So I will state the recommendation so that we know what we are debating, which is to confirm that Environment Fund capital funding can be provided for the Little Thetford C of E primary school low carbon heating project to decarbonise the school's heating prior to the site being handed over to the Diocese of Ely Multi-Academy Trust. So is that seconded? Yeah, it's seconded by the Vice Chair. So Councillor Corney, you were indicating. The moment has passed, I'm told. Councillor Coots.
Thank you. 3 things I wanted to say on this one. The first was my relief at point 2.2.6, that reassurance that we would not be setting a precedent in this case. So we would not be changing policy. We would be simply waiving it in this one case, which is very important, I think. The second is to look at the actual situation rather than the technical situation. What we wished to do was have the school in Little Thetford. We'd continue as a school educating children and having low carbon heating. That will be the case if we continue, whether it's become academised or not. The climate aspiration will have been achieved. The school will still be functioning as a school, but it will not be in our ownership. And so on that basis, I'm inclined to support continuing with the programme. The other point, though, is to consider that the Multi-Academy Trust are gaining an asset which will have been enhanced in value as a result of this action. And therefore, I think it's entirely reasonable for us in the public interest to make sure we negotiate well with the Trust and make sure they make a contribution to this gain in asset which they'd be gaining. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Coots. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, in principle, we want all schools to be low energy buildings in the county. And if we don't support it now, we would lose the PSDS funding, which has to be in train by March. Otherwise, they'll lose that funding. Their current boiler is 25 years old, and whilst functioning and okay at the moment, likelihood it will need to be replaced before long. And you will appreciate that is why I asked the question at the beginning, whether they had been approached already as to whether they'd like to make a contribution. I'm quite happy that we don't go into the detail of that, but Councillor Coots is bang on the money, which is what I was going to say, that, they are, so in principle, I think I would support proceeding with this, because otherwise they won't get all of this cleverly orchestrated funding for the project. But I do think that they ought to be held to account for this singularly improved asset that they will have at the end of it. And I think we should make sure that we get the very best deal of this from the school towards that 103 to 163,000 capital contribution, which otherwise we would be paying from our environmental fund. And I had originally suggested we ought to be aiming for at least half of that, if at all possible. And whether that's possible or not, I don't know. But you know, I think we ought to be getting a significant proportion of that back from the multi-academy trust. And after all, we were told that one of the virtues of going to a multi-academy trust was the big organisation had the ability to support individual schools when big financial projects had to be undertaken. And this is exactly what a multi-academy trust was set up to cover. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bradnam. Councillor Corney.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Yeah, just like to add my you know, weight to that, really. I guess I think when we talk about an asset, it is an asset, but it's an asset that it's still our children in our county that are going to be going to, and it's they're going to be educated in it. And it's as Councillor Schumann put in his letter, that it's a good opportunity to use that to educate their children at school as well, and further afield. I was going to ask a question previously, but it's sort of say when the matter had passed. But I think we should just count into, we look at all the numbers that we've got, that potentially from grants that we will lose, or we have to pay. But we shouldn't forget what our officers have done up to this point to get in this application to where it is. So that's a figure we have to sort of take into consideration as well. So I was going to ask about that, but I don't think there's a need to ask the question now. I'm just making a point of saying that let's not forget what our officers have done as well.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bradnam. You wanted a second bite at this.
Thank you. It occurs to me that actually the point that Councillor Coates made earlier on is that by academisation, they will acquire the building. And I wondered if, I don't know the circumstances of the current ownership of the building. And I just wondered whether we will be taking legal advice on the handover of the asset. And I don't know what happens with that when schools academise, but surely the county must be compensated for the loss of an asset, mustn't it, in that process? I'm not sure how it works.
I'll ask Cheryl to respond on that.
So yes, there is a legal contract for handing over the assets. The one thing that I haven't got an answer on, which we're looking into, is generally we hand them over on a 125-year lease. Now, I don't know if that applies to every school. So we are trying to just understand if we still have a long-term interest in the building or not. So that would be something we'd need to follow up.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. Anybody else wish to contribute to the debate? I mean, I think what I'm hearing is, firstly, I very much share Councillor Coates' relief at the statement in here that this situation at Little Thetford does not and should not create a precedent. And I think that is absolutely right. It is here because it is a special case at the moment in falling outside our existing policy. As a general point, I think that even if the proposals from the government to force every school into academisation are not presented in this Parliament, nonetheless, this is clear that that is a direction of travel from this government, and therefore we need to review our policy in the light of emerging government directions of travel. And that therefore may mean that we will have to review our approach to decarbonising schools per se, if every school is at greater risk now of being handed over outside the direct control and ownership of this council. And the amount of money that's going into that needs to be reviewed if we are paying into other people's assets. I think that therefore means that we need to consider in general and broader terms what our approach should be, because currently our policy is simply to support and advise academy trusts on decarbonisation, not to fund them to do so. On the specific instance, I share the frustration that's been expressed about this, that we are now in the position where we are most of the way through a very good piece of work, only to find that we are handing over a very nice present indeed to a multi-academy trust. And I think that I share the view, although I do not want us to conduct negotiations in this committee. That is not our remit. I think there is a clear steer to officers that we want to ensure that DMAT, who are receiving this gift of between 100 and 160,000 pounds from this council, in addition to the grant and the loan, should be very strongly encouraged to make the most substantial available contribution to this piece of work for what will be their building. I think that's a steer from this committee to officers as part of the final negotiations. I'm not seeing any objections. Frustration, yes, but objections, no, to what is being proposed. Cheryl, I think, wanted to just come in just before I then move to the vote on this.
Can I just check then? So that steer isn't then part of the, does that become part of the recommendation? No, okay.
It can't be. That there is a deadline for submission of amendments, which is always difficult when you've got late papers, but technically, as the paper was circulated on Monday, could have been complied with. So we're not going to amend the recommendation. That's why I used the word steer, because it's outside a formal recommendation process. But with that steer, firstly, can I just check members are happy for us to steer officers in that direction? Is that generally agreed? Yeah. Then therefore, can I put the recommendation to the meeting? Can I see those in favour of the recommendation? We're on the recommendation now, Councillor Bradnam.
Include that we will take the strongest legal advice about the...
We can't amend the recommendation, Councillor Bradnam. We are now on...
Informative.
A steer. All right, can I see those in favour, please, for clarity? Yes. Thank you very much. I think that is unanimous. So thank you very much indeed, members, for that debate. Moving on then to item 7, which is the committee agenda plan and appointments to outside bodies and internal advisory groups and panels. I'd like to ask the Democratic Services Officer to update us on any changes to the published agenda or appointments.
I've nothing to add, Chair, unless officers have anything to add.
Don't think so. So thank you very much indeed, Dawn. That's very helpful. We're asked to note the agenda plan. Thank you. So item 8 now is exclusion of the press and public. So in order to discuss the detail of the final item on our agenda, we will need to move the meeting into private session and exclude the press and public. Members, do you agree with the proposal to move into private session? Agreed. So we are therefore resolving that the press and public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the agenda contains exempt information under paragraphs 3 and 5 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, and that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed, and that is information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information, and information in respect of which a claim to legal professional privilege could be maintained in legal proceedings. So as this is the final public item on the agenda, I'd like to express my thanks to those members of the public and press who have taken the time to watch the meeting today via the council's website. The broadcast will now end, and this committee is due to meet next on the 16th of March 2023. The public part of this meeting is now closed.